warmly welcome you to our web talk, Rethinking Digital Administration, what Germany can learn from Estonia, Lithuania, South Korea, and others. The Friedrich-Naumann Foundation is a political foundation, and this is unique worldwide, as in Germany, each of the major parties has a foundation affiliated with it, financed with public funds, and dedicated to political education. The foundations differ in their political values, and we are the only decidedly liberal foundation in Germany. Our task today will be to provide the audience with suggestions on how the German administration can become more digital and thus faster, more efficient, and less error-prone. We want to hear about this from experts from the Baltic states, South Korea, and Germany. So I am very pleased that Lukas Ilves, Professor Teivo Nam, and Professor Caroline Fischer will be taking the time to discuss these topics with us today. The event is moderated by my dear colleague Charlotte Zeller. Charlotte works at the Liberal Institute of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom as a consultant responsible for civil rights at administrative digitization. So my special thanks goes up to you, Charlotte, for taking over. But before, let me please add one more information. Everyone is invited to join our discussion. So if you are live on Zoom, you can use the F&A function and send us your questions and your ideas. That's it from me. I'm looking forward to inspiring 90 minutes. Dear Charlotte, from now on, the event belongs to you.
Okay, a warm welcome also from me. We are going to start with two presentations. The first presentation will be from Lukas Ilves, who's now advisor to the first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, and was the former Undersecretary for Digital Transformation in Estonia. And then we are going to have a presentation from Professor Nam Teu from Sungkyunkwan University, where he's a full professor for digital information policy. And we are then going to go into a discussion together with Professor Caroline Fischer from University Kassel, who is the chair for public administration and management. And without further ado, we're just going to start with the presentations.
Thank you. Let me just get my screen shared 1 second. So can everyone see my screen? Great. So, and I had the privilege of writing a paper with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation on these questions that was published a bit earlier this year. So I'll be sort of briefly giving you some idea of what the paper is talking about. And so I will talk about, actually, I'll start with the results, because it's normal when we talk about digital government that we talk a lot about the technology and what we're doing. But actually, we should start by asking, well, what are we actually trying to achieve by doing that? And then I'll talk a bit about how and why Estonia and some other countries have been successful at this, and then finish up with some recommendations for Germany. And I think for Germans, the real question is, what does a handlungsfähiger Staat, you have this initiative launched by the German president, actually look like in 2025? So what is it that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania have done a better job at in terms of achieving governance results where digital transformation has played a major component? And the first of these is just the business environment. Basically, does government provide a platform for people to start businesses, to run businesses? At a very basic sense, it's, is it easy and fast to start a business? But then it's really, what's the overhead and the administrative burden as you run a business? And it's always good when you can measure these things in quantitative terms. So for me, perhaps the best indicator, it's the third row in this chart. What are the hours that a company actually spends, for instance, on their tax reporting? In Estonia, it's 50 hours a year on average. For a same size company in Germany, it's 200. And that expresses itself ultimately in how many people start companies, how well they grow, and so on. There's also other ways of looking at friction in the business environment. So for instance, what's the percentage of the overall value of real estate that when you have a real estate transaction, you buy and you sell it, that gets lost to administrative overhead, to fees, to the notaries, to things like that. In Estonia, maybe it's 3-4%. In Germany, the number is closer to 9 to 15%. Or how long does it take to resolve a court case? In Estonia, it's the average civil court case takes basically a few weeks. In Germany, actually, in this particular case, we have no data. Now, none of these are things that are purely a function of digital transformation. They also reflect other reforms that have occurred. But you ask sort of how and why these things get to these much better numbers, a large part has been the technology-driven transformation and the very practical digital tools and services that let you go through these administrative processes. And it also ultimately makes the governments more efficient at providing services. Again, it's hard to come up with whole of government measures, but there's some areas where we have pretty good comparative numbers. So for instance, tax administrations have this great comparative data on what's the actual cost of collecting 100 euros of tax revenue. In Estonia, the cost of 100 euros of tax revenue is 20 cents. In Germany, the same cost, and this is just the cost to the tax administration. We're not counting the cost to the filers and all the bureaucracy for everyone else to prepare their taxes, is basically between 6 and 7 times higher. And a lot of that comes down to automation, to how much data is used. Or let's look at the percentage of healthcare costs that go to administration. Bearing in mind that the Baltics do spend less of their GDP on healthcare than Germany does, and that's not actually a great thing. I think we should spend more. We have very efficient administrative overhead. So in Germany, the percentage of healthcare costs that go to administration, it's a bit under 5%. In the Baltics, it's between 1.5% and 2%. Why? E-health, a lot of these sort of processes around reimbursement, et cetera, much more automated. And that ends up saving a lot of costs and time. You can look for other little proxy indicators. One of my favorite ones is the number of dispatch centers for emergency services. Of course, Estonia is smaller than Germany, right? So maybe the real thing you want to look at is number of dispatch centers per capita. But I can tell you that the difference is about 3 or 4 to 1, right? Estonia's got 1 that's been consolidated for the whole country. In Germany, you have 232. If you're feeling bad in the US, it's 5,000. So things could be worse. But this is it's a little example, right? Where the reason you have 1 in Estonia is because you started off having many, 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 is you've consolidated them over the time. You get to the point where you have a single fusion data center where everything runs together. You've got dispatchers who, first of all, can solve very complex problems. If it's a maritime spill of oil, they can pull in all the different services at once. They can look at the entire country. They liaise very well with the different service providers. And you don't have the situation of when you go from one administrative boundary to another cases getting lost. The data and the automation make that possible. It's not only that, you also have to have the political decision. So this, of course, ultimately this expresses also in more transparent government. So you've got you've got corruption, historically has been much higher in the former communist countries, but an interesting convergence where basically if we look at the trend lines today, we'll have a lower level of perceived corruption in Estonia than we'll have in Germany quite soon, in spite of the sort of very high level of trust you have in institutions in Germany. And in some areas, the perception actually is that, we ask about corruption in public contracting. Estonia today is already perceived to be quite a bit more transparent. Other practical sort of outputs of having good digital platforms, something very practical, how much identity theft do consumers experience? It's 2 to 3 times less in the Baltics than in Germany. And the really practical driver of that is how easy is it to steal identity? If you have a widely used digital identity that's secure, the identity theft and the fraud around it just don't occur. And what's happening over time is driven in part by these digital reforms, the sort of overall capability at sort of providing public services of the Baltic states has gotten dramatically better. And this chart here is a massive composite of indicators for rule of law, control of corruption, political stability, effectiveness of government, quality of regulation, a bunch of different things, right? Hundreds of indicators, basically put together from World Bank data. Now, Germany historically has been one of the best governed countries in the world. So, in a global comparison, Germany still looks pretty good. But the issue for Germany is that the trend line for the last 2 or 3 decades has been one of slow, gradual degradation. And while Estonia hasn't, for instance, yet overtaken Germany. It's basically on track to do so. Not only about digital, it's about other reforms, but a lot of the how and the what in practical terms is about the infrastructure, how the day-to-day functions, a lot of which is about tech. And flip side, we look at what's broken in Germany, a lot of that expresses itself in a lack of that transformation. So how and why? What are the sort of things that the Baltics have done well that other global leaders in digital government do well? A few thoughts. The first is really learning to think about your users and to engage with your users and provide services the way a consumer-focused company does. There's a whole bunch of things that your average telco, e-commerce provider have learned about how you develop services. There's a mindset that's built into the companies, and governments that are good at doing their services learn from that. So part of this is just something that we call user centricity. It's just basically asking all the time in a very obsessive way, what's the user journey? Are they happy? Like the main strategic KPI that we have in Estonia for public services is user satisfaction. And we expect everyone to measure the user satisfaction, to have plans in place to make it better, exactly as you would in any e-commerce company. And one part of what this leads you to do is you start consolidating and simplifying your services. So there's this idea of life event services, which a lot of countries have, which is that instead of thinking of, agency 1, agency 2, agency 3 have services, you have to go, what's the life event from a user perspective? And there's a lot of different services involved. So if you're getting married, there's changing your name, there's getting new identity documents, and you get all the people who are responsible for this in different agencies together and redesign the service so that the user experiences this as a very simple single service on the front end. There's a lot of technical things you have to do, but it starts from this mindset. Like we keep on talking about things, and I thought, it's always good to have a demo. So I want to sort of show you a live video from my declaring my taxes this year. This is me going to the tax authority website, signing in. I enter my national ID number, and then I will press continue. And then what you don't see is I get a notification on my phone that basically has two-factor authentication. I verify that I'm in fact me. It takes a second to do that. I'm logged in. I click that I'm me, myself, and I'm not representing my children. It shows me my tax data, everything that's collected. This is, by the way, not unique these days. Lots of countries do sort of pre-filled forms. I scroll down, review everything. Maybe if this were the first time I was doing it, I'd actually check if the data are right. Click through a few things, and then I'm told this is what my income tax return would be. And we have a nice little feature where then the income tax refund I can send to myself, but I can also pick a nonprofit organization, and then the bank account for the nonprofit's already pre-filled. Tell them, input how much I'm getting. In this case, I chose my church parish, press confirm, and that's it. My taxes have been declared. The refund has been sent to my church in about 45 seconds. And this 45 seconds actually ends up being a very common threshold. So this last year in Estonia, we digitized for many, many years 99% of our services. But there's one service we hadn't digitized for a very long time. And you'll see in a moment why. But the government basically said, okay, we want to have 100%. So we're even going to digitize the last one. And so that last service is divorce. For the longest time, you did have to go into a government office to get divorced. You can now do that online. You still have a 30-day waiting period. So you can't get divorced in 45 seconds, but I won't show you this. The process of clicking through to the button where the next step is the notification that you want to get divorced goes to your other partner. It also takes 45 seconds. And I've clicked through to the very last button several times. I've not pressed submit because my wife would not be very happy. And this is actually, this is a screen that I see myself if I wanted to divorce my wife. Not a service I want to use. Now, the interesting thing is these transformations, they don't have to take massive amounts of time. And for me, the real case study here is Ukraine. 2019 gets a really charismatic new digital minister as part of a transformative government in Ukraine that says, we have to fix how government services work here. And they start by building this very compelling consumer service, their app, Dia, which in Ukrainian means action. So it's got this idea of, we go from government just doing bureaucracy to really acting for people, that has identity built in, that has services built in. They launch it basically within a year. And it's incredibly popular. Today, 60–70% of Ukrainians use this. In the context of the war, it has been used to provide a lot of emergency services. And Ukraine has gone in global rankings from 100th in the world in terms of quality of online services to 5th in the world in the course of about 2 to 3 years. And And this really gets to the rub. It's not just, can you build a good service? The thing that matters, and this is, again, familiar to anyone in a commercial context, is do people actually use it? What's your uptake rate? So the real thing to measure is what's the percentage of individuals actually using your service? And this is where we see that Germany really has a challenge. There are very good bits of infrastructure and service in Germany, but the adoption, and of course, then the government strategy and actions and so on that would lead to that adoption is what's lacking. So it's a mindset that has to go from let's build the thing to let's get the thing actually into people's hands and measure whether it's working, whether it's making them happy. And interestingly enough, the adoption of e-government services is not correlated to overall adoption of internet usage. So if you compare Estonia and Germany, same percentage of the population uses the internet, uses smartphones, etc. It is really something specific to digital services and to the government. The second really important lesson is around two core building blocks for government in digital transformation. Digitization, it's data and identity. These are kind of the logical infrastructure of a modern society. Do I know who I'm interacting with, and can I actually exchange the technical characteristics of parameters of data to make that service work? And again here, it's not do I have it, it's what's the uptake. Germany has Digitalausweis, a digital identity platform, perfectly good, technically quite good, but less than 10% of the population uses it. Whereas in Estonia, the number is around 90. Other leading digital government countries, it's higher. It may even be higher in Korea. Some numbers say 95%, depends on your metric. So the result of this is in Estonia, 1 million Estonians have 500 million transactions a year, which if Germany had the same level of digital identity usage that Estonia has per capita, you would literally have 1,000 more times digital signatures and authentications than you do today, which kind of gives you some sense of the magnitude of what Germany's missing out on, because all those authentications and signatures are either on paper or they're less secure options that lead to more identity theft, et cetera, and less automation. What you see in Estonia is like the percentage of people who don't use EID because they lack the means, it's basically zero. In Germany, you ask people, why don't you use EID? Most of them say, well, we just don't have one. So like figuring out this adoption of getting the user to actually change their behavior is the missing link. A similar thing is true for data. So Estonia has a data platform similar to many other countries. I know Korea has a similar approach. Many countries have come up with these whole of government data platforms to build these services, to move data between sectors. One thing Estonia has done that few countries have done, I actually think Korea is one of the exceptions, is open that data platform up to the private sector. Because a lot of the important services in society, they're not just public services. They require data to move back and forth between public and private sectors. Let's say medical, right? There's private providers, private insurers. There's a national insurer. How do the billing information move? Or you want to set up a liberalized energy market, you need to have the regulator, the transmission operator, the different market providers, individuals, all exchanging data. So opening these platforms to use also by the private sector. And the third thing, really quickly, is transparency. If people ask, so why do people trust all of this? Don't you have the concerns you have in Germany about the surveillance state? And the short answer is that the most important part of the surveillance state in Estonia is the citizens surveilling the government. Every bit and byte that gets moved in Estonian digital government is logged and transparent. It doesn't mean that every bit of data is transparent, but the metadata, what are the systems, who's allowed to access which data, what are the logs, this is visible to everyone. So this picture you have here, it's a bit confusing. It's a mapping of some of the largest data providers and data exchanges in Estonia. And you can zoom in and look at this. You can basically see every agency, every body, public sector, private sector, who exchanges data with whom, what data do they exchange. And so you have this infrastructure in place that data misuse, if it happens, it's immediately transparent to everyone in the ecosystem. And this is also, extends more broadly to how citizens control their governments. I can see the expenditures of any public body, like every single invoice that is paid by every public body, publicly visible. So for instance, this is the extract of the invoices paid by the Prime Minister's office in December of last year. Interestingly enough, I've circled here 23 euros that were paid to the state brewery. And in principle, if I wanted to know why did the Prime Minister's office spend 23 euros on beer, maybe it was sparkling water, I could go ask them. And so this creates this feedback loop of accountability where citizens know that they don't have this distrust of what the government's doing because they know that actually it's fully auditable. And what this ultimately means is that the level of trust in public services, the satisfaction, both because of the transparency, but also much more fundamentally because the services work, is quite high. I also want to flag really quickly, we don't have a lot of time, what's next. We're, of course, going through an amazing technological revolution right now around AI. And so I think the thing that I've been spending a lot of time working on right now is asking this question of, well, what does a state that is using AI agents look like? This is an interesting paper that I've written actually with the Global Government Technology Center in Berlin on what a sort of a state with AI agents might look like. It's an interesting read. Happy to talk about it in the discussion, but we'll skip over it now. So what about Germany? What could Germany take away from all of this? A few points. The first, it's not really about technology. It's actually about the goals and the purposes. The reform agenda is not one about the Digitalstaat. It needs to be about what are the outcomes of government we actually care about. Transparency, ease of use of services, citizens being satisfied with their services. And frankly, if you don't want those transformations to happen, if you don't care about those, then it's going to be very hard to do the technology work to support it. And on the flip side, if you only talk about digital transformation without talking about why you're doing it, that's not going to ever be more interesting to more than 5% of your voters. The second, as we said, is really to think like a consumer company when you're actually doing your services. And there's really two very simple components to this. One is, are your users happy? And the other is, how many users do you have? And get those two things right, you focus really on everyone, what you have to do to get everyone to use your services. And that will force you to think through all these questions of, is the design good? What are my distribution channels? Can it be used by a 70-year-old? But it's a very simple metric. And then when they use it, are they happy? A lot of things fall into place. The third is your digital infrastructure, which exists in Germany. You have a Digitalausweis, you have data exchange platforms, other bits. Make that available to society as a whole, because the value comes when the public and the private sector build services together. And behind this, there are some mindset shifts. And of course, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. One is the sort of the mindset around federalism. And the point here is not that federalism is wrong, or that the idea of subsidiarity of decisions should be taken closest to where it's sensible to make them is wrong, but that there's a mismatch between the principle of subsidiarity and a lot of how decisions get made on technology in Germany. So technology choices, in some sense, are very similar to standardization choices. Once you've built something, you can apply it horizontally at almost no marginal cost. And so it's sensible to do things like picking your data standards, picking your platforms at a whole of country level. And that choice, these choice of technical frameworks, doesn't necessarily impact the autonomy to make policy decisions. And so you have a situation today where Länder and even small towns jealously guard their technology choices because they view that as part of their decision sovereignty. And that's really a mistake, because there's nothing, you can have the same platform, the same standards, but they can be configured differently in Wiesbaden to Berlin. And the second is this thinking around trust and transparency. It has become, I think, in Germany, and I say this not as a German, but someone who has lived and worked in Germany, it has become almost a religious mantra that we can't do many things in digitization because of history, because of fears of the surveillance state. And first of all, it's just objectively wrong. You have more citizen oversight and more control that is possible with good digitization than without it. And indeed, all the disaster scenarios you're worried about, I mean, let me be straightforward. I'm sitting right now in Kyiv. When the dictator comes, the dictator or the autocrat will do what they do, will want to do, regardless of whether you have a data platform or not. In fact, today China will sell you all the tech you need as an autocrat to build a surveillance state, and you could do it in basically 6 to 12 months. So the question then is, for a democratic and open society, are you going to undermine your state capacity in the abstract fear that it could contribute to a surveillance state, where the end result is actually going to be that through poorer state capacity, through more corruption, through less accountability, you will more likely yourself create the conditions that are much more likely to lead to that degradation in governance? But actually, the real driver of trust, this is an abstract thing. This whole thing about the surveillance state and history. It's an elite affectation. It's something that's worried about, and this is what survey data also in Germany shows, by a fairly small percent of the population. What Germans care about, there's a wonderful regular study by Initiative D21, the e-government monitor, is exactly what Estonians or Ukrainians or I imagine Koreans care about. They just care about, is the service good? Does it work? And when there are better services, the trust goes up. And so instead of having this abstraction, worry about doing your job, doing it well, and the trust will follow. So this is sort of what I hope that Germany today looks at, and the transformation that the government really undergoes in the next years.
Thank you very much. We're just going to start off with the next presentation right away and then have the discussion.
Okay, can you see screen well? Okay, thank you.
We can see that. Yes, we can see that.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tae Nam. I'm working for Graduate School of Governance, Sungkyunkwan University, Korea. The title is Practices of Digital Governance in Korea, but as I got a direction, I think this digital governance case should be local or provincial level, not the national level. So there are some mixes of the, some are examples of national case, but the other practices are mostly local and provincial case in Korea. What's happening now? As you know, governance has very many different definitions. Webster dictionary doesn't have any fixed definition. This is a working definition. But many people say governing without government. So without government, as the previous presenter says, digital services like consumer company. So consumer company means market mechanism. So without government, we can do. So there are many ways. But good governance has some components: transparency, accountability, responsiveness, rule of law, participation. These concepts are, I think, a key components of the governance, good governance. And also digital governance also should have these kind of good features. So local digital governance should have transparency, accountability, responsiveness, rule of law, participation. It should be. This is a kind of normative way. But actually, in a reality, we need to try to do. Defining digital governance, there is a strategic framework that defines how an organization or government manages a digital resource, like data, technology, infrastructure, online services. But goals are very simple. Sometimes goals are such as efficiency and effectiveness, responsiveness, and policy compliance. There are so many goals exist. In Korea, there are many cases of e-governance. Generative AI, I used ChatGPT and Perplexity, what else? Google Gemini. They found these cases, but their opinion and my opinion are just the same, because the Korean popular e-government websites, they boast this kind of web page. The first one is Government 24. This is a one-stop government portal. Almost all countries now, advanced countries, have this kind of one-stop government portal. I know, but this one is really big, heavy system. So many public services can be provided, and allowing citizens to apply for and receive various documents. Yeah. This is Government 24 system, and also CONAPS. This is e-procurement system. Procurement is always a kind of a source of corruption in many developing countries. So 20 years ago, the Korean local government, Seoul Metropolitan City government, they started e-procurement system, online system. And then this system is a national version of the system. It's a comprehensive online system for public procurement. The other one is National Subsidy Management System, e-NARA system. Subsidy is not a corruption, but sometimes this is networking. Some local governments has a good connection with the Ministry of Interior or other ministers, and many, not corruption, but sometimes networking impacts how much the money subsidy is really provided in the local governments. But this subsidy system is for transparency, yeah, and also anti-corruption. And also, there are so many unqualified or sometimes some mistakes applications driven by the local governments. So we can use AI and we can detect some faults or problems. And then we can provide our financial resource more efficiently and effectively. these three cases are the national level governance case, e-governance case. But from now on, I will talk about local or provincial level e-governance case in Korea. The Seoul, the population of Seoul is 10 million, and the whole Korean population, South Korean population, is 50 million. So 20% of people are located in Seoul, a huge city. But actually, much more than 10 million people, because so many people are living in the Seoul metropolitan city area. So Seoul is sometimes heart of the culture and also economy and also public service innovation too. The democracy Seoul. So many young people are living there, and Seoul has some flagship platform for citizen participation. So this is an open space for all citizens, all residents, sometimes all tourists, to propose idea, to engage policy discussions. So we have 10 million imagination section. This is a kind of policy imagination. Sometimes we can vote here, and this is a kind of hybrid system. So we can use application, digital application, and we can also the offline town hall meeting. So it's a mixture, yeah. But we feel this application, this democracy e-Seoul mode is very, very efficient tool, very efficient, because how can we collect, how can we gather 10 million people at the same time? Impossible. But many concerned citizens can participate in the Democracy Seoul webpage. And some representative people, they can, in person, they can participate in the offline idea. And also M-voting is also another application web launched by Seoul Metropolitan Government. So mobile voting app. There are so many mobile voting app. We can use instant messaging service. We can use application, but this is a kind of, how can I say, authorized application, the authorized voting application. So Seoul Metropolitan Government used this voting app. Many government officials, they want to know what's the percentage of supporting this idea, or what's the percentage of objecting this idea. They can just open this agenda in the voting app. And then many people are participating in the surveys and opinion polls. This is not impacted by the private parties. This is not influenced by the companies. So this is very politically neutral and authorized application. M-voting. This is a screen capture of that. Another one is participatory budgeting system. I think many countries, many city governments have this kind of site, but Korea, we used, I remember the movie, 300 Spartacus, yeah, 300 people. So this one is, the nickname is 300, yeah, Spartacus, 300 people. So, but sometimes we are not limited 300 people, or sometimes much more than that, or sometimes less than 300 people. But anyway, voluntary citizens can participate in participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting has two functions. One is agenda setting. The other one is we can speculating the budget size. Sometimes too over-exaggerating budget ideas, sometimes underestimating. So, but citizens, the citizens have some the wisdom of the crowds. So their ideas collected, and then they can find the better idea, sometimes best idea. So we use this kind of participatory budgeting system. Another one is a smart ocean village in the Busan metropolitan city. Busan is east southern part of the Korean peninsula. This is a coastal city, and number 2 city, big city, and also coastal city. So this has very unique natural environment situation. So smart ocean village is also a platform to allow citizens to actively participate in environmental management, environmental matters. Yeah. In some case, who are participate in environmental matters. Usually environmentalists, environmental groups. I'm not disrespect them, but sometimes their idea is too political. Their idea is not representing all citizens. But this one is not only environmentalists, but also usual residents' ideas can influenced by the citizen city policy function. I think this one is maybe last one. City policy participation group. This is Gwangju city. This is another metropolitan city in Korean Peninsula. Digital platform Gwangju On. This application recruits citizens to policy participation group. And all these members can regularly participate in online surveys and the major city issues. So many people can use the dedicated, consistent channel to gather citizen inputs on some topics. You know, this city is 1.5 million people population, and their problem is very usually sometimes very regular. In the summer season, we have sometimes drought, the deficiency of water sometimes, and the natural problem. And the winter season is we have very big snow. And in that case, how can we swipe the snow very easily? So people have some ideas. Government official doesn't have any idea actually, because their idea is very limited in the legal binding. But people, citizens, they have creative ideas. So they use this kind of creative ideas. This is the citizen policy participation group in Gwangju. Okay, I will talk about later in the discussion time to how these kind of cases can be beneficial for German learnings. And then I will talk about in the discussion time later. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Okay, then we're just going to start with the discussion. And I would first like to hear from Caroline about basically how Germany compares, because we've gotten these really, really great introductions to these digital success stories. And also first heard that obviously Germany does not, sort of hasn't catch up or has fallen behind rather. And so I'd like to hear how we compare and basically also what the main obstacles are right now.
So I think Lucas already told us that, right? Told us all the figures. So it's always a question of compared to whom. So I think if we compare within Western Europe, Germany still performs quite well, because all the Western European countries do not perform as well as South Korea or the Baltics or other countries in the world, New Zealand, Australia. There are many frontrunners, right? So yeah, there's a lot of truth in that, right? And whoever has been in Germany or lives in Germany knows that things often do not work when we talk about digital. Whoever visited other countries is sometimes surprised how easy things can go. I worked in the Netherlands until half a year ago, and when coming back, I was like overwhelmed by the kind of analog bureaucracy, I must say. So the picture Lucas pointed is totally correct, I think. And there's nothing to talk about. The obstacles you were asking for, I think some of them were already mentioned. It's certainly federalism. That is one issue, but we can also not lay back and say it's just federalism. We cannot do anything about that. That's the structure of the system, and that's how it is. Another big point that was not mentioned so far is, I think, also red tape and over-institutionalizing things, and that is a thing that has to do with German bureaucratic traditions, right? We are a country of Weberian bureaucracy. Everything is very correct. Rechtsstaat, a lot of lawyers in the government, and that is how things go, right? Everything is always proven for, is it according to law? Sorry to say that, Charlotte, you also have a law background, right? But that is sometimes leading to a kind of mindset that is always proving for, okay, is that correct? Is that according to the law? Can we do that? Where's the thing that is not according to the law? So that limits often a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimenting with things, and hindering innovation in the end. That is certainly also a big thing. And that is maybe even worse than federalism, I would say, because so if federalism is the issue, you would argue, okay, then you have many different local solutions, you have many different solutions on the Länder level and so on. But if we look alone on the German federal level, you have so many actors responsible for digitalization, right? They all want to have a share of the cake, so to say. And they are kind of, I think there's even confusion on the federal level, who's responsible for what. There's now a big step made, right? The new government, they kind of created a ministry for digitalization in order to kind of centralize things. That is the first step. It has to show whether that works out. So if the other ministries are willing to give away power, that will be the question, right? So it's a mixture of structural and mindset issues. I would say a lot of things have to do with organizational administrative culture as well. But, and that would be my last point to that, it's also the citizens. It's not only the government, but a lot of these mindset things come from the citizens, right? And so often when we discuss, like, could we do that? Could we do these things? Could we do the EID or the data sharing that Lucas was mentioning, or many of the projects that Theo was pointing to? It's also the citizens that say, can we do that? What is happening to my data? What is the risk, right? A lot of innovation is also hindered by this kind of so a very risk-averse citizenry, right? And that is kind of making each other worse, I would say. So yeah, this is, in my impression, these are the major points. It's not technology, it's not so much the professionals working in the public sector, but it's really this kind of culture thing.
I think we're going to talk about a lot of these things later on as well, but I want to be fair and ask Theo and Lucas as well what sort of the issues were in your respective countries, because I can't imagine that everything was always easy, and maybe that's also like a good learning to see how you can overcome problems.
Should I start? So it's interesting. Of course, the path dependency for Estonia, for Latvia, and Lithuania was very different, right? Because you basically had in the 90s a situation where the governments, the countries as a whole, had to rebuild their institutions and their market economies. And so is it easier when you don't have the legacy? And in effect, we got really lucky on the timing. We did this rebuilding just as the internet was becoming a widely used phenomenon. People were all getting PCs at home. Yes. But the question is that an excuse for not working on it? I mean, we see lots of countries, including in Western Europe, that have at some point said, okay, we're going to do it. And is it harder? Do you have to do more efforts if you have existing institutions? Yes. But just to reflect, sorry, I was going to talk about Estonia. I mean, look, in terms of Estonia, we'll talk about Germany in a moment. There you have a positive flywheel that starts going and it works. And the other example I'd bring is Ukraine. I mean, what truly worked in Ukraine was having charismatic political leadership that created a sense of movement around this and created a sort of it wasn't the abstract idea. It was like there was a very concrete product in people's pockets that worked, that showed them this sort of improvement worked, and then you kind of build on that. And this happened in a way in Estonia too when we first started. The very first service we launched was the online declaration of taxes back in 2000. And it was incredibly popular. We got to 90% usage in 6 or 7 years because it solved a real practical problem. And then that becomes a reference point. It's like, if we can do that, well, can't we do 10 other services that have that same effect? And it creates popular demand. And so in Estonia today, it's actually not a very hot button political issue because people have just kind of internalized the assumption that these things will work well, and it's sort of there's a political consensus to work on it. But if you haven't gotten to that point, you probably have to do some political disruption first.
No?
Okay, it should be my turn.
Yes.
Okay, I definitely agree with the Caroline's ideas because actually the study of public administration starts from Max Weber. Yeah, you know the Max Weber, yeah, very famous social scientist. The Max Weber has the create ideal type of bureaucracy, and the Bismarck's, I don't know, the Republic country in the 18th century, 19th century. Korea, interestingly, we are very different location, the East Asia, but Korea is follow after that country, actually, that regime. Very interesting because Korean culture is a kind of mixture of the Max Weber's idea of bureaucracy plus Chinese old Confucian culture. But that kind of mixture is very well matched. What is different from Germany is Germany is a very strong country of federalism, but Korea, we are really trying to federalism, but we fail. We are a very centralized country. So digitization and digital transformation has advantage from centralization because digital transformation needs standardization and uniformity and some very simple rule, consistency. So we have very good advantage from that kind of tradition and culture, but we are now stuck. Why? This is the first industrial revolution and the new type of digital transformation. We need the creativity. So the third industrial revolution, we have succeeded, but now we are losing the way actually. Think about the China and United States. United States, yeah, we know that that is a democratic country, capitalism, but China is very weird country, the capitalism, but not democracy, but two AI big country. So Korea, we don't like the communist society, but they have very good success. How can we interpret this kind of concept? Because China, they take up all data from the citizens because communist country, they can do. But United States, under the name of the national security, they can do. But Korea, we have so many regulation. So regulation is maybe all regulation. The original spirit is helping country, but now all regulation is damage to other regulators. So regulation versus regulation competition. So AI, digital transformation, cloud computing system, all types of new initiative, digital transformation, we are stuck. So now this time is how Germany can learn from Estonia and Korea. Maybe, I don't know, nothing maybe, but we can share actually, because we have the same problem. I memoed obstacles, federalism, local autonomy, red tape, the mindset, and the risk aversive, the attitude of the citizens, very simple, very similar actually, not so much different. But the difference is the degree of that kind of all obstacles. Maybe Korean government is more strategic to use that kind of obstacles. So we can lift the hurdles very faster than Germany sometimes, but other times we just gave up. We abandoned. Okay, we cannot do, but maybe risk aversive things we can use incentive, motivation, financial motivation sometimes. So cultural thing never change, but people are moving with some financial advantage, voucher, coupons, subsidy, that kind of things. Yeah, maybe that's the way of the fast moving. And red tape, government, the national government, I mean, the ministers and prime ministers and president, they used competition system, local government, and within local government official to government officials. So they compete each other. So, okay, you can promote it, you not. So this is a kind of the very competitive motivation system. So we can use that. Actually, that is also from Max Weber. So we use that kind of system. Yeah. Old, but problem is people are not happy. We are not happy with the digitization, actually. Bhutan is #1 country in the happiness. They don't use digital device. So we actually envy the Germany because Germany have Audi, Benz, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Porsche, and we are envy to the United Kingdom because they are creator of the Scotch whiskey. So Korean people, success people, we drive Benz and then we drink Scotch whiskey. So that's the happiness in Korea, not using Samsung as mobile phone actually. Mobile phone, mobile service, e-service, all things are now creating the necessity. So people's expectation is too high. That's the problem of the government. Actually, government is really doing good, but never happy of the people side. Their expectation is high and high and high. Yeah.
But
Okay,
actually,
go
in
ahead.
some ways, the fact that Korea has such tech giants and sort of homegrown tech solutions is also a unique sort of positive factor that really helps, because you can just buy products from your sort of own country and don't have to look to foreign countries, and that helps with sort of issues of digital sovereignty and also just getting the solution you want. So how is that sort of something that sets Korea apart?
Maybe that's the power of the younger people, I think. Yeah, people's ideas can be gathered, and then those ideas can influence Samsung Electronics, LG Electronics, and Hyundai Motors. They can move actually. So many people think big tech groups, companies are owned by the family owners, and their decision is very slow. Maybe part of that is true, but the other part is the real power is Korean younger people, their ideas. So citizen online participation group and the channels of that kind of conversations. And we use, there are so many conversation channels in the online system, reply system. So we use that, and the very big family group owners and also government officials, they are very, very sensitive to use those ideas.
Carolina?
Yeah, I totally agree, Tebo, and I think it's speaking also to what I mean with it's the citizens, right? And I wanted to react to something that Lucas said. It's about like political disruption. And I think this is really the point. It needs this kind of symbolic leadership, and it needs priority setting, right? But what we've seen, for example, in the last national elections in Germany is that with digitalization, you win no election, right? You win an election at the moment with welfare politics, and you win it with migration politics, and you win it with whatever. But it's definitely not modernization of the state. And I think the problem there is, and you showed us that also in your figures on like governance indicators, it's not bad enough yet. So people are not kind of fed up enough yet. And the question is, do we really need to get to this point? Because that's, of course, catastrophic, or can there be a shift beforehand, right? And how to convince people about that. And that is hard, I think, because when I see what is like the talk, so to say, the political talk at the moment, it's very often other topics that dominate the debate at the moment, right? And for example, in the Bundesland where I live, we have local or Länder elections coming in the land, local elections coming up that way around, and digitalization of local government is no topic at all. Nobody is kind of bringing that up. It's just not kind of interesting at the moment. And as long as we have that situation, so this missing disruption, this missing kind of priority setting, not a lot of things will kind of happen, at least not top down, right? Bottom up is maybe another option. But I totally agree with you there.
So we've
Maybe
heard,
I can, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Maybe I can add with Caroline's idea. Maybe Korean, one of the Korean success story is come from the public-private partnership, the big side and the high level partnership. For example, the president meet Samsung CEO, and the president meet LG CEO, and there are some. I think that's not corruption. Maybe 30 years ago, there was corruption, but not anymore now. Because think about the Donald Trump, he has a very good relationship with Elon Musk. So the big tech companies are now very good relationship with the country leaders. And Korean government is because the digital sovereignty. Actually, we have very good relationship with the United States, but we are also cautious of the United States too. Why? Because Google company, they take all data from us. So we use the Naver portal site. Naver is Korean portal site. That's number one in Korea. Korea is only one country actually, because other countries use more than 50% of people, citizens are use Google, but Korea is more than 60% of people use Naver first and then Google. So Google's ambition is they invade Korea and then took the data, but we want to keep actually. One more success reason is left government, right ideology, left ideology, doesn't matter. AI and data, this industry, all people are very patriot actually, currently in Korea. we are also very cautious from the China too. So we are kind of weighing, balancing the China and the United States. So who will win on the what is will be the standardized new normal? So we are think very carefully, but we need to be very careful actually because United States they launch system and then 10 years later they request the money. I'm the one of the first 1,000 customer in Google actually. I joined 20 years ago Google. At the time, Google promised me for free, always, in my lifetime. But they lied actually. Now I have to pay 1 terabyte, yeah. For once a year, I have to pay more than $400. Yeah. So that's the story actually. And also Google has my data, so much my data, photos, videos, and the documents. So Korea government now, we want to subsidize the Korean industries. So that's a really interesting, I think, really interesting and also very important, I think. Yeah, that's one of the story in the Korea.
So basically, we've heard that disruptive services can sometimes be good, like having an example such as the app in Ukraine that really got citizens on board and showed them sort of the benefit. And so I was wondering, because the public, I think, is really looking to, at least in Germany, to AI to kind of change everything up. What your views are on that and what sort of the countries are doing and what's working and where the sort of future is seen there. Colleen, you can go first.
But I mean, my opinion on that is certainly a bit different than the others. I'm actually a very tech optimist person, right? And I love technology and I use generative AI a lot in my work, my students, unfortunately, as well, leading to problems sometimes. But my opinion on that is, first, there needs to be a kind of strong digitalization of internal processes. And before that is not done, before we do not have e-records everywhere, or before we do not have fully digitalized processes without printing out things and signing them on paper in between, should we even talk about AI use in government? We're not there yet, I think, at least in Germany, right? And it's a bit of thing that you can sell, but the problem is, I think the basis is lacking. I think there are other priorities, and the speakers made them, right? We need a citizen platform. We need a solution for data exchange. We need an identity solution. That is actually the groundwork that needs to be done first, and then we can talk about AI. That is my opinion. But I know that there are experiments with using chatbots for kind of improved decision making in certain policy fields, or they are experimenting also in tech services now, right? With using algorithms to automatically check citizens. And in Kassel, I read now, the city where my university is situated, they make a suggestion for how much tax return will be given to a certain citizen because they are way too late with their tax declarances. So a bit like Lucas suggested that with the pre-filled forms, right? That is kind of a pilot case at the moment, and that is also built on certain algorithms calculating that. So there are kind of these lighthouses that you see somewhere, but I think on a general level, launching real big AI solution in government, that's 1,000 steps forward, I would say. And before, we need to solve some kind of basic issues.
So I have a slightly different perspective, which is ChatGPT has a 50 to 80% adoption rate in most developed countries today. It is the fastest adoption of a new consumer technology product in human history. And right now, most people are still using it in a fairly dumb way, but the agentic capability is going to be coming on there very quickly. So you're going to have, and German consumers are no different to Estonian or South Korean consumers in their basic tech competence. You're going to have both individuals and companies that are using very powerful agentic systems. And not in some abstract and very practical operational sense, you will face a choice for any government. Either you meet that user. It doesn't mean that it's not a question of you necessarily having your own agents, but does your data infrastructure, does the way you govern identity, do your APIs let you do that? Or your user is just basically going to DDoS and hack you to death. because you're going to phone calls to public administration. The people that you have answering the phones are going to have individuals who are no longer speaking themselves, but it's going to be their agent speaking for them. Why would I call a behörde? If I had to call a behörde or send a fax, why would I actually do it myself? I'd have the agent do it for me. But of course, the agents can make 20 calls at once until it finds a solution. So you're going to have a 100x volume in inbound. And so I think the evolutionary pressures are going to be really painful. And the only real choice is like, how quickly do you get ready for that? And the other thing I'd add on the pilots is, look, the challenge is not going to be, can you do pilots and experimentation? And we just read a nice MIT study, all of us, that took 5% off of NVIDIA's valuation 2 days ago, that 95% of AI pilots in enterprises are failing right now. That's not because they're not technically capable. It's because they're not delivering the value. They're not integrated. There's some AI challenges where the technology is to mature, but a lot of it is the organizational transformation. I think it's the pressure point of how much pain does the administration itself want to have is going to push this thing to happen sooner than later. And I think there's really just a question of like, do you do very strong concrete steps now and you can mitigate some of that adoption and growing pain, or is it a really big cliff in 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, very interesting point, I think. Yeah, I didn't think of it in that way, but generative AI may be the highest adoption rate ever in the world, I think, world history, I think. Yeah, maybe. Another example is China, because China can do everything in the technology adoption and also technology use. That's the power of that, the real superpower. Because their experiment, we cannot experiment actually. Korea is we have legal binding, so there are so many regulations. But China has very strong advantage is the responsibility. In Korea, there are some problem maybe. If there are some problem, who will be responsible for this problem? We need to have the very big legal suit, and we have to fight conflict, social conflict. But China, communism party responsibility, and then some people are demoted. That's it. So very simply, they can adopt technology and they can do so. In 10 years, they have really big success, especially AI side. So that's the problem. And also robot. But Korea, we are stuck now. So we can use the following after what already United States learned, and we use that. So this is a second-hand learning, not the direct learning. That's the problem. The first-hand learning is always United States and China, only 2 countries. The other countries is second-hand and third-way learning. So this is very limited, but I don't think we are already late because there are so many room for innovation, digital services, e-government, and welfare. There are so many because welfare, especially welfare, is a very different context. Estonia, Korea, Germany. So, and also education is very different. So we have so much room for new innovation. So we will explore those areas. But generative AI, robot, this is already losing game actually. So I want to focus on what will be the winning game area for Germany, Estonia, and Korea. We can find each other actually. We can share those ideas. Yeah, we can do, I think.
So what comes up, I've just had a quick look at the Q&A, is a lot of the times that people sort of find these really inspiring, but are sort of finding reasons as to why this doesn't apply to Germany. And so one thing, obviously, that we're going to talk about is federalism, but the other thing also that comes up is the sort of unique geopolitical situation for both sort of the Baltic states, but maybe also South Korea, with Russia and North Korea as neighbors, respectively. And so the question was whether the problem is that maybe Germans just don't have that inspiration from outward, that it's really important to have secure, good working digital systems, and that motivation is lacking.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a trivial point, right? I mean, some kind of sense of urgency that I mean, as Dr. Fisher said, if it's not bad enough, and the advantage of a security threat is it helps people to imagine bad enough without it actually getting bad, right? But that's like a very structural background thing, like on a very sort of basic level of people's sort of fears. And yeah, so like it does mean that there's some demand for this, but like I would translate that into the question of not thus we can't do these things in Germany, but okay, we have to find a different set of political narratives. And it's very clear, all of the institutional questions and the politics around this, there's no single path. I mean, and this also gets into the minutiae. Like there's no one way to set up the digital ministry, no one appropriate legal or administrative setup. You can describe in functional terms what good looks like, but then it is a specificity of every culture and every country to figure out what's the pathway to those things working in my country. So, I mean, this is a question that an Estonian and I think a South Korean can't answer, which is what is the political formula in Germany that would in fact generate the sense of urgency? And the only encouragement I would give you is two things. One is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. And I think all or nothing question. I mean, you do have these dramatic cases like Ukraine, but you also have lots of examples of quite significant piecemeal sort of fits and starts of progress in Europe to look at. So Italy, for instance, some governments ago, brought in some really capable people, guy who was previously a vice president at Amazon, rebuilt the digital government agency. And today, Italy has one of the better digital government agencies in Europe. There's a whole bunch of digital infrastructures that are very widely used. Not the adoption rates you have in South Korea and Estonia, but like really an amazing leap. And it's starting to slowly affect the quality of government services. Greece, the current government, or sort of the government that started in 2019, amazing reforms, and they've gone to above average in Europe. And from the stereotypes that a lot of Germans, I imagine, have about Greece, total transformation. Portugal, very good. I would say on average 2 or 3 years behind Estonia, which is not very bad. Spain has done a whole lot of work on this stuff. So the countries that stereotypically Germans might think of as not having very strong administration have figured out actually how to make a lot of progress. They may not be at the very top of the global league charts, but in the KPIs around adoption, user satisfaction, they have made a huge leap.
Add to that. So I also skimmed quickly through the chat, right? And what I saw there was, as Charlotte said, all this kind of, but you cannot compare it. It's so different in these countries. These countries are so small. These countries are so what and what and what. And of course, there's a point. But so my former political science professor in my bachelor studies used to say, you can compare everything with each other. You can compare pears to apples. You can compare me to a dictator. That was a very interesting discussion we had. So of course you can compare things, and maybe, and that's I think what Lucas said, we cannot just copy paste the process, right? Because countries are different. We cannot copy paste the exact tool and how it was implemented or whatever. But I think what you can easily compare and try to copy paste is the eventual outcome. So which kind of services, in which kind of way could you actually deliver, which level of happiness of citizens or whatever, right? And then find the way exactly how does that need to be situated legally in Germany, on which federal level, blah, 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 blah. Exactly, and this kind of inspiration I think has to come from these countries. And then maybe it's still this also what I hear a little bit in Luca's answer, it's still a little bit this German arrogance that we're actually doing quite well and kind of oversee the progress in other countries. And then I think it's just good to have some kind of international contact every once and then to see, oh, that is actually also a solution that we could have in Germany, and then kind of getting to this kind of bottom-up pressure, right? And asking the politicians for, why do we not have that? Why do we not have that? And whatever. But what I would like to kind of resist against a little bit is this kind of story of we cannot compare that to each other. That's totally different contexts. Of course it is, but still there's always something to learn from a comparison, right?
Yeah, I definitely understand. Politics is very important in the digital government. I think this is a cow path. What I'm understanding, the cow path is we can expect very slow career, and then we cannot expect what direction is really exactly what's going on. So Korean, the politics regime is left, right, is upside down. And also we experienced 2 impeachment. The president kicked out, actually. So, and the next to the impeachment, the next administration is not revenge, but almost the revenge level. So all people are changed, actually, in the administration side. I mean, bureaucracy is very rigid. Bureaucracy itself is rigid because they are technocrats. But who are the above of the technocrats? Politicians, appointed people. So I'm not sorry, elected people. Elected officials in Korea, they are always superior to appointed officials. Appointed officials, the Max Weber said, they pass the exam and then they are very well studied people. But elected officials, actually, they are very popular. Yeah, sometimes handsome, good people, sometimes come from celebrity groups. But those people are now dominate the real decision power. So sometimes they use the populism. So they can give the money to the old people, coming the left ideology people. So there are so many problems in here, Korea. And also, back to the original question, the security threat is also a huge problem too. The data, information, I think one more thing, intelligence. So in Korea, so many data is hacking by the North Korean hack groups. So we are very worried about that, but we don't know why and how, actually. When, where, we don't know. After that, we realized that, okay, that was hacking. So there is very scared people. So now North Korea and South Korea is not only the physical power struggle, but now we are moving to the next generation of the war, hacking war. So maybe after, owing to that, we can have more higher level of security. How can I say? Yeah, the technology security level. But this is not happy momentum, I think. So we have some connection with the Japan and China, but Russia, but all countries have very different ambitions. So the trust in other countries are very limited. So that's the problem too. So anyway, back to the politics. So Korean politics has very heavy responsibility. We have to struggle with the North Korean hacking groups, and also we have to alliance with other neighboring countries in terms of digital government, in terms of the digital transformation in the national level. So that's the very big assignment to the next generation, I think.
So going back to the questions in the chat, one of the sort of points where we really don't compare is federalism and unitary states. But I was still wondering whether there are maybe things we can learn from sort of regional and cooperation with a centralized government that might still be applicable to Germany, or whether it's completely incomparable. Lucas.
I mean, I think the point before about having platforms that are really used by the whole ecosystem, and let's say that you could say that local government, I mean, anyone that's not the central government, doesn't really matter. If we're talking about local government, we're talking about businesses, right? EID, you go to all the countries that have successful EID systems that get value to systems level, not more than 20% of the volume of transactions are related to public sector. It's true in Estonia, it's true in Sweden. I don't know the numbers for Korea, but my hunch is it's the same there. So you can view local government use of the EID platform as a subset of the overall ecosystem use. Same thing is true for data sharing. So I would almost say, maybe instead of trying to solve the local government problem alone, solve the broader question of how can you come up with these sort of common infrastructures that the entire ecosystem uses, because the practical effect is the more in anything technology related, like the common components, shared platforms, reduce marginal costs and create network effects. It doesn't matter what the nature of those users are. So do things that will make it cheaper for each successive iteration of a service. Like when I'm building an e-service in Estonia, I don't have to solve identity. I don't have to solve data sharing. I don't have to solve some of the UX questions that solve for me. And so there's a lot less work for whatever agency, whatever organization wants to build a service, and it costs less and it gets done faster.
And in addition to that, also just setting standards, right, that the local levels can then apply. And I think so. The discussion turned quite negative towards Germany, right? But I must say there are also great initiatives. It's not like there's nothing going on, right? And there's super cool developments, especially on the local level, sometimes even on the federal level, where people just try out things. And the initial idea of the big digitalization law in Germany, Onlinezugangsgesetz, OZG, right, was, in my opinion, actually a very good idea with this principle of one develops, but then everybody kind of can use it. So we pilot test and then scale it up. The principal idea is super cool. It somehow did not work out. I also do not really understand why. I think in the end, it's political priority and missing resources on the local level. But this idea could, in principle, work very well also in a federal country, I would say, right? Yeah, and we just learned from that. No, Lucas went to Bavaria. No, I think we can learn from that also, that this model of we make a law and people will kind of comply and will do it, that just doesn't work, right? So we have to find other also governance mechanisms for that. Also, the federal government has to look for that. So just making regulation is not working out. And then I think one thing that could also help, and that is not related to federalism and so on, is to rethink a little bit hiring strategies and also collaboration strategies. Teo already said something about public-private partnerships, because not everything has to be done by government on themselves, right? Why not also by NGOs, even private sector companies? But I think the general German culture is to be very skeptical about that. Okay, that is built by a private sector company. They want to get my data and want to earn money with that. Okay, but sometimes maybe it's not bad because it brings us a good service in the end, right? And this is the kind of mindset, I think, that is also something that has to develop somehow.
Korea is very different system. Constitutionally, we have local autonomy, but not federalism, quite different. And also, even if we guarantee local autonomy by the constitution, functionally it's not, because two reasons. One reason is local subsidy. So many company headquarters are located in Seoul and other cities. So only some country had the headquarters. Their corporate tax is collected in those areas. So Seoul is rich area, but the other rural area is very poor. So all financial resources should be redistributed. Redistribution is linked to local subsidy. So subsidy is a very important function. That's one reason. That's kind of dependency, not independent, dependency on the national level government. The second reason is local leaders, local political leaders, their goal is go to national parliament, congressperson. So they're kind of promotion concept in Korea. So that's the kind of local capacity of the promoting digital governance is very poor, I think. Yeah, that's the very big problem is now, because the Korean population is losing every year. So younger people is going to the Seoul. So rural city, rural areas, there's a problem. The population is decreasing, and also aging society is really super high aging society. There are so many problems. So another one is many Korean people, they're every year they are going to Germany and they are learn from United. After United the Germany, the East Germany and West Germany. After that, what happened actually? Because Korea is always, think very carefully, North Korea and South Korea. Someday we will unite it. And then after that, what will happen? So North Korea, absolutely, is a super poor country. It's very different from East Germany, actually. After that, how can we treat those countries, that area? How can we build so many the infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure, everything? So that's our local context issue, very huge issue. Within South Korea, our gap among localities, and the next, the future, North Korea and South Korea merged. And then after that, how can we respond in that situation? Maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, 20 years later. Anyway, we will have to prepare for that. So that's why we are learning from Germany every year. So many people are learning about that issue, actually. Okay.
Ich habe bloß gesagt, bin ich stolzer Münchner. I'm actually born in Munich. So yes, when you mentioned Länder and such, it is worth noting Bavaria and also Munich have done some very good things, as have other places in Germany. And one of the neat things that the federal government's actually done is they have a very nice dashboard on e-government adoption in the Bundesländer. Problem is, for now, it measures whether you've done things. So it's like, have you done a service digitally? And I think if you added more of these uptake and impact measures, which is not a too terribly hard thing to do, you push some of that competition. So I think you have, and I've mentioned many times the digital platforms you have, I think you have the components to do it there. And I think in some sense, there's a bit of a mind trick of actually the worst institutional problem you have in Germany is not any of the actual institutional problem, but it's the assumption that because of the institutional problems, you can't do these things. So you have to get over this sort of slightly self-defeating mindset and just start believing in yourself.
You know, I'm a scientist. I'm always skeptical. So, but there are others who have to be more optimistic. That's true.
One question that has also come up is basically that in Germany we have some processes where we can talk to the government online, we can give them information, but then still the final decision is made on paper. And so the question is, like, how do you systematically approach that you do not just sort of put a paper process online, or that you have a break in the process, but have like a digital only good working process?
I mean, you have to do it. Look, I mean, yeah, I don't know. You just have to do it, right? I mean, sort of, it's one of those things that if you, there's a whole big sort of set of best practices on how to do the kind of mechanics of digital transformation, the steps, and you use that toolbox. And it's no different to doing it in enterprise. The one thing that maybe helps on a sort of interaction of the administration and the user bit is we had a very simple mandate when we started using digital signatures in Estonia, where you had a right as a citizen, as a user, to have your digital signature accepted. So the administration did not have the right of refusal. If there was any kind of administrative procedure, if you came with a digital document in the digital form, the legal burden was not on the administration to serve you. And so basically, for whatever reason, the administration couldn't serve you in digital form. That was their problem. If there were costs, whatever, the liability went to them. And so that very quickly creates a situation of, if you have a bunch of, so if you come in, if you contact an office and they say, well, you have to come in and don't do it, then if you don't do it and costs accrue to you, let's say you get fined, nope, it was a problem of the administration. They had the obligation to accept things digitally. They didn't. The fine is legally invalid. And in fact, if you had costs that came because you weren't issued a license you were entitled to, then those costs, it's a liability of the administration. So I mean, there are algorithmic hacks, if you will, that don't solve the problem, but create these very strong pressures. I think it's really, I mean, the actual things you have to do, get a project manager, get some money, go do it, right? How big is the pressure? So maybe you should think, especially in a big system, what are these little things that will create those feedback loops and those pressures? Maybe you don't turn that right on overnight. Maybe you have 2 years of warning, or you start rolling it out, you have one small domain, and people realize that it's very painful inside the administration if you don't do it, and then they start taking it seriously.
And then, yeah, go ahead.
In Korea, the national government used push strategy, very strong push. So we used KPI, Key Performance Index, digital transformation, KPI metrics. One of that is open government metrics. So they need to open by default and digital by default. So all public agencies, local government, the national level government, the government ministries, all people use digital document first. But that's the principle. The reality is very interesting. Paradox of digital-only policy, because paper document absolutely very much decrease. That we guarantee. But problem is number of PDF documents. Number of PDF document is increasing because so many documents by file, online file. And another issue in Korea is the baby boomer generation, and I'm the X generation, and my next generation is millennium generation and Z generation, G generation. Especially generation G, they are very different people because they don't use digital. I mean, they use digital, but for example, we are depend on email. Email is now replacement of the official documents. So we need to send email, but they use instant messaging, just Kakao message or Facebook message. That's it, actually. They think, okay, we did all actually. But that's not approved, that's not authorized. So communication channel in Korea, there are very serious problems. So we used only Zoom meeting and also email system and the cloud computing system. That's the only authorized way. But actually, the millennium generation, they work very different channel, their own channel actually. For example, me, I'm using Facebook, but my subordinate, they use Instagram, and the other people use TikTok, and then they use those messaging services, and their conversation is already official. But the senior generation, they don't count. So that's the problem. Anyway, we use push strategy. So it's kind of how much rate is already digital transformed. We count that. Then that's the push strategy. Yeah.
I think one sort of complex I would like to get into a little bit towards the end is sort of cost saving, because apparently that's working really well in South Korea and, for instance, Estonia. But Germany, tax collection is to an extent digital, and that actually added to the cost. Like we managed to build something to reduce bureaucracy, but it added to it. And so the question is, like, how do you approach that and make it work?
So the tricky thing is the cost saving, and this is a truism also in the private sector, never comes just from having a nice digital solution. You're absolutely right. Just adding a digital solution on top is more costs. It comes from moving people off of the economics of what they were doing before. You only realize it once you have adoption. And I think it's, and I think Professor Naumann pointed to this, it's not enough to have digitization in the sense that you change the medium, that you go from things on paper to things on bits and bytes. If you replicate the paper process in the form of PDF documents, all of the overhead costs are there, all of the constraints are there. And we have a lot of bad experiences globally of countries that digitize, paper workflows, and there's still forms you fill in and they still get processed, even if the thing they're processed on is a screen. Like you have to have automation. You have to actually attack the cost drivers, both for both the administration themselves and the users. So and one of the practical problems is usually there's upfront cost, and then if you're successful, you realize the gains downstream, often a few years later once you have adoption.
And I think the problem is always thinking in parallel processes, right? And that is something that is often done in Germany with the argument, the elderly, I don't know which type of population, but then we create this kind of double processes, and of course that is costly. So I think sometimes one just has to be bold and say, now there's just a digital process, deal with it. And most people are able actually to do that, right? Very quickly, Lucas, we know that from Scandinavian countries, their full digital processes are no problem for the elderly. They somehow get it done, right? So it's a bit a kind of argument.
I think you're broadly right, but I think the nuance here is in Estonia's case, nothing for none of the citizen-facing services. This is different for businesses. For businesses, we say, you know what, if you want to have the competence to run a business, you're going to have to file things electronically. Every single citizen service, there is an in-person or paper fallback. Then what you want to optimize is reducing the number of people that use it. And like, you know, when you get to 90+% using the digital channel, it's much, much easier to have the like exceptional channel for a small number of people than to run that for half. So when you have 50-50 digital electronic, it's really costly. When you have a 90-10, 80-20 split, it's okay. And I think we've basically accepted the principle that for the actual front office interaction, there will always be in-person channels, which doesn't mean that it's not actually digital, because the moment that interaction happens, it goes straight into the same workflow, right? It's purely a question of whether the user's inputting that data or whether that trigger happens when the person who's talking to them puts the data in. There's some extra cost there, but that's an acceptable thing to bear.
Yeah, exactly. And in the example of tax filing, the interesting thing in Germany is that Elster, right, this thing where you put in your taxes digitally, is a front office process, but the back office is not very digital, right? So sometimes the tax office is printed out then, or they have to manually kind of move one number to the other system because there's no kind of connection between softwares. So actually, it's the wrong way around, right? There's a kind of digitalized front office process, but the back office is completely, I don't know, in 20 years back. I don't want to be too bold with that, because I know that many tax offices are experimenting also with automatic solutions and whatever, but that makes it costly there, because there is where the personnel comes in, right? And where a tax office responsible for, let's say, an area with 100,000 inhabitants has 1,000 tax officers, and that makes it super costly. That's the thing. It's not the process as such, so to say.
I definitely agree. 50% online, 50% offline is more dangerous than 100% offline. So hybrid system doesn't exist, actually. We need to move 100% online, or this is very dangerous. Korea is simple too, because local area people, especially aging people, senior generation, they can use. So they go to tax office, and then some helper, they help how to use online system. Actually, this is not hybrid, actually. We need to pay cost for helpers, government officials. So very expensive system sometimes. So this is a kind of transition time. Yeah, very struggle of the transition time, I think.
So I'm basically just raising my hand because unfortunately we are at the end. And this was really great, both the presentations and the discussions. So thank you to all of you. Also, thank you to everyone who asked questions in the chat. And thank you once again to our partner organization today, KRLID from Korea. And that is it. So